10 episodes ago, I started this podcast with a simple question, and it was a question about albums. But somewhere along the way, I realized that there was more to talk about than just how albums are created. And even in talking about how albums are created, we're talking about and trying to hit at something deeper. And between Fuji and the 80s Blueprint episode, and even the one about genre politics, I realized more that we were not only just studying albums, we were studying expectations. And expectations, my friends, have consequences. Because pop culture doesn't just create stars, it also creates timelines for them. And those timelines are not equal. Some artists are allowed to grow, while others are punished for it. And the punishment really announces itself as punishment. It will disguise itself as critique, concern, or even nostalgia, but it's rarely neutral. So for today's episode, episode 10, we're asking a simple question with an uncomfortable answer. Who gets to grow up in public? I am Adeolua, and this is Losing the Plot. Episode 10, you guys. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I can't believe we've been doing this for 10 episodes. It's kind of crazy. But thank you if you've been listening from day one. Even if you just joined, I really am very grateful. It's a huge milestone being consistent for 10 weeks of doing something and getting better at it and getting feedback and just evolving and talking about things I always talk about every week. It's been such a great joy for me. But I'm really pumped. This episode 10 feels different. And it should, because episodes 1 through 9, if we're looking at the broader picture of all the themes that I've run through the episodes, we've been dissecting the architecture of stardom, right? It's not something I intentionally wanted to do, but it's kind of how the trajectory of the conversations that we've had have gone. And this episode, I think, is a good episode to kind of look back at all the things we've talked about up until this moment and, kind of dissect who survives the architecture of stardom. Who are the people that get to survive all the things we've talked about? Because we've talked about those people, but we can talk about why and dig a bit deeper into that. Because when I started Losing the Plot, I thought I was just going to talk about albums, strategy, pop culture, and mechanics. But every episode has been quietly building towards this one. So if we just want to look back, episode 1, we talked about how albums are never just albums, using Adekunle Gold's Fuji as our reference point. In episode 2, we showed how blockbusters are engineered using Taylor Swift's 1989, Ed Sheeran's Multiply, and Sam Smith's In the Lonely Hour. Episode 3, we proved that the industry can rewrite itself under pressure. In episode 4, we talked about how some artists become systems. Episode 5 reminded us that technique can reshape culture. With Brandy, one of my favorite ones that I've done so far. I really love that episode. Episode 6 exposed genre as power, which was really talking about country and hip hop and how they are cousins. Episode 7, we mapped out the blueprint of the modern pop stars, citing the 80s legends, of course, as how we get the pop stars that we have today. Episode 8, we destabilized the obsession with vocal ability and talked about how that's a bit more nuanced, how being a pop star has to do more with your presence and your timing than your actual singing capacity. And episode 9, we argued that meaning outlasts moments, using Broadway to cite how pop songwriters can become better, or how pop pulls from Broadway and musicals. And now we have to ask what all of that costs. So again, if you've been here since Fuji, thank you. And if it's your first episode, please follow or subscribe wherever you are listening, because today's conversation only makes sense when you see the architecture we've already built and that we're going to continue to build. So please, wherever you're listening, like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. It really is encouraging. So I think to start out today's episode, we're going to move back a little bit and not too far back. So we're moving back to understanding that in popular culture, we're talking about aging specifically, because that's one thing I want to start with. The archetype of the pop star, the one that we discussed, it never included aging. It never included aging. Yes, okay, that's okay. Like, wait, what? Is that correct? Yeah, the archetype of the pop star never included aging. In episode 7, we talked about the 1980s and how they engineered the pop star. And some of the things that we talked about there were spectacle with Michael Jackson, image control with Madonna, authenticity with Prince, perfection. I think perfection was kind of with Whitney Houston, and branding with Madonna again and with Janet. So we talked about all these people and how what they've introduced to the industry is how we get to the modern pop star that we have today. But here's what we didn't talk about that day on that episode. The blueprint of a pop star, the archetype of a pop star, it's interestingly enough, assumes permanence. There's something about that archetype that insinuates that you will be a pop star forever in your powers, which is not how anything works. Not just popular culture, just in life in general. No one is supreme forever, and so we've seen different pop stars struggle with waning into the background. There's this saying on the internet that when a new supreme arises, the old supreme loses her powers. Right? It's really true in pop, where when some new act is stepping into the light and changing the sound and changing the direction of things, even though most times they are borrowing from what the older supremes or the older people that came before them inspired them to do, that the ones that were top of mind before start to kind of win in the back. And not every pop star, as we know, has navigated that with, I guess, the best of planning. Because I think if you are a pop star, if that's your career path, it's something you should plan towards, that one day I have to pivot. And the people that stay relevant to us in whatever ways forever, they find ways to pivot. In again, it kind of changes from person to person, but yes, that blueprint assumes permanence, and it also assumes constant relevance, which is interesting again because it's just impossible to be forever relevant. And the thing that archetype assumes the most, because the thing that keeps it the most relevant to us and that keeps it going the longest, is that it assumes youth as currency. There's so much that you can do at the peak of your pop stardom that is because of the age that you are. There's so much, especially for female pop stars or even male pop stars who are, are out there flipping in the sky, doing splits, even in terms of your vocal ability, the kinds of songs you're able to sing and hit. At that time in your prime, the compound interest of doing that for years in and years out will weigh on you. So the archetype was built for performance, not for life, though. And that's where the fracture begins, because human beings change, right? Voices deepen, faces mature, beliefs evolve, even energy shifts. But pop culture tries to freeze artists in amber. It tries to freeze its stars in amber. We essentially want them to be 22 forever. And that's impossible. But if you take a moment, even for now, if for now as you're listening, you take a moment and you picture a pop star, like when someone just says a pop star, what comes to your mind? Who comes to your mind? Take a moment. Who comes to your mind? Okay, how old are they? How old is this pop star that comes to your mind? If you're being honest with yourself, there is a certain age that you're probably thinking they are supposed to be, and that answer honestly says more about the culture than it says about you or the artist. It's a collective narrative that we've all allowed ourselves to buy into over time. That a certain age and a certain look is where a pop star should be, and then when the people start to get older, and it's so interesting because human beings spend more of their life being older. You spend more of your life not being 18, 22 or 25. But we really crystallize those moments and we expect people to parade in that and act like they are those ages forever, which is where people start to see conflicts. And I think it weighs on a lot of singers and pop stars, especially women. I think the culture is harder on women when it comes to this, because men usually age into authority, right? Male artists age into credibility. You think about a rock frontman with great hair, that's a legend. Or a rapper in his 40s, that's an OG rapper, right? A male pop star pivoting into stripped back music, we now take it like that, they're being more mature. But when you flip that, right, a woman in her late 30s experimenting, some people say that, oh, she's trying too hard. Or even a woman at 40 embracing sexuality like the way she's always done. People will say that it's being desperate. Or a woman moving away from heartbreak narratives, say that she's lost her edge. So the difference with aging, and this is what one of the topics that we're trying to dissect in this episode, who gets to age in popular culture. Just starting off with gender, the culture is kinder to men when it comes to aging. So the difference isn't talent, it's comfort. For whatever reason, patriarchy, we are comfortable watching men expand and we're less comfortable watching women evolve. And that discomfort, because of how liberal-minded people like to pretend that they are, they try to mask that discomfort with critique. and try to act like it's everything but that. But if you break down the reason why you are giving these women that critique and you're ailing these men in that way, it's patriarchy. It's um we will like watching men get older, and for whatever reason, God forbid a woman is in 25, especially in popular music. So when we think about reinvention, which is why female artists reinvent their personas and their styles and their genres way more than men, because with reinvention you run the risk of either being praised or punished. I remember in episode 7 we were talking about how Madonna really made a style for herself with having a knack for the reinvention machine. But even as though even when she did that and she was celebrated for it many times because we tout her as the person that really made eras and invention a thing in popular culture. There are also been times that she's been punished for it. In fact, every reinvention that she went through, that she did, came with some type of friction or a battle. I was watching a documentary the other day of Madonna and her run as Evita. When you think about movies today, you think about the press tour of a movie. So you think about doing the press of the movie, and in more recent history, celebrities, actors, and actresses, they've been, what's the word again? There's a word for this. They've been essentially, when they go on red carpets and they style themselves after the theme of the movie. It has a name. It's like concept styling. I want to find this. I want to get this really bad. 1 second. It's essentially like, so when Zendaya goes on the Spider-Man press tour and she does a styling that reflects the theme of the movie. So that kind of styling is what it has really gone up in Hollywood, right? And when Madonna was cast as Evita, she was the first person to really birth that concept, because she had a very distinct style before being cast in the movie, and her casting in the movie was already kind of controversial. But after she got cast as Evita and she was doing the press tour for Evita, she would go everywhere dressed in similar things like Evita would wear, or pay homage to it. And in the moment, because what had happened before that time was that when actors went on press tours, because they wanted to show that they were different from the characters that they were playing, they wanted to dress differently or more seriously, and not dress like their characters. So they were like, so you would win a period piece, but when you went on the press tour for it, you would something more casual to show seriousness of the acting. But Madonna was able to figure out that a way to market the movie was to dress like the character in the movie and elongate the conversation of that while the movie is being promoted. Now, she didn't invent it, but she was one of the people that really brought it to the forefront. And when she did that, it was even then received with some backlash. And even as she's continuing to age, the narrative has started to shift for her from innovation to being excessive. The older she gets, it's less like, oh, she's reinventing. It's become like, oh, she's old, she's trying too hard. We've seen something similar happening with Britney Spears in recent history. When she changed, it became a spectacle, and then people have started to, as she's continuing to find herself and find her voice post whole family issues, it has started to come over an issue. So reinvention can be praised, but with women we see a pattern of it being that they can get punished for it. Same thing with when Miley shared her Disney image where she had her bangers era. It was quite scandalous. Taylor, when she shifted genres from country to pop, which wasn't that crazy of a jump to begin with, it was framed in suspicion. And if we remember the Taylor Swift episode when we talked about her being singular, one thing that she was able to do is master the narrative control, right? So smart female artists do when they're about to change eras, especially as they start to get older and they know that it's going to be met with some type of backlash or misunderstandings, that they go ahead of it to frame the narrative. Something that Madonna has also mastered, so same with Miley and same with Taylor. And something to notice there is that because they are women, for whatever reason, they have to control that narrative, meticulously, constantly, because women don't get the luxury of chaotic growth. Men can, you cheat on your wife, you make an album that's lauded as, you finding yourself. I just, like it's such a trope in for male pop stars to have like an album about fame, an album about being a bad boy, an album about, finding yourself. But for whatever reason, finding yourself always, most times, has to do with cheating on your wife. And it's just like, bro, you can't find yourself with your stuff in your pants. Like, goddamn, y'all. And then it's oftentimes, and almost think about your favorite male pop artist. They've had a similar or adjacent ish, if not in a marriage, in a relationship where they were, trashy and whatever. But that kind of grace is not extended to women. It just isn't. Because again, like I said, women don't get the luxury of chaotic growth. Men get messy eras that become mythology, but women get messy and the era becomes a stigma. So they have to get ahead of it to control it. So just starting off the bat, we've seen that men, if you're a man in popular culture, you are given a bigger chance, a larger leeway to evolve and grow and to get older in the public eye than if you're being a woman. Now let's take that list and shrink it down even more. So we're going to talk about race. And again, like it's just this episode, I really like this episode because it feels like a reflection of everything we already talked about. Because race, we talk about race in the country and hip hop episode, and even more interspersed around that, all of that episode. But race shrinks the margin for error. And this is where we actually need to slow down to understand that. I'm going to, for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to be talking about black people and how that juxtaposes against other white artists, right? But it's also important to mention that there are more races in the world than white and black, right? But most of the struggles that black people face can be, all the other races have similar experiences with that. And so some of these things are things that are also applicable to other races. But black artists are rarely afforded innocence, right? When Whitney came on the scene, one of the reasons why she struggled later in her career, because that she was introduced as this immaculate figure, and she had to keep that up. When she wanted to try more fun things, more cool things, it was largely frowned upon. And we talked about this a bit with Race Records, but the fact that there was even something called Race Records, but it was the concept of, if you want to sell to the mass audience as a black person, you have to be branded in a way that white people will not find threatening, and they would find comforting to watch. And that really stripped a lot of artists of their identity, because what does that even mean? Brandy also coming into the game had to be super disciplined. Beyonce had to be strategic beyond human levels. And again, in episode 6 we talk about genre policing, and episode 5 we talk about vocal discipline. But what connects all those conversations is that black artists must always justify their presence. And think about that. So we talk about how being a woman is already a hard place to be for someone that wants to go and evolve, which is everybody. But then you take that and make that even more specific. A black woman, for example, must always prove why they're there, which means they must age carefully. There's less space for public confusion, less tolerance for decline, less grace for experimentation that fails. And it's not just fandom, it's the structure, right? So just out the bat, gender and race are just two factors of our world till today, because we like to feel like we are so evolved and we live in the future and this is 2026 and da. But these things are still prevalent today, and we still have artists fighting against the grain to say that this is not okay and we should be allowed to evolve. Even having a project that flops, depending on who you are, that can be the end of your career, and for someone it can be just a stone that they have to pass, right? So again, as the audience, we have the responsibility here to be like, you know what, where is so and so? Where's she at? Let me go stream her music. Let me go buy her tickets. Because there are times when the industry tries to silence people, and these people put in years of hard work into getting any semblance of success. So if there are artists that you support and love, and you just kind of see them fading out of public consciousness, try to do your own big one. And I got, it's a lot to ask of people, but because you have so many options, right? But when you can, if you can, one of the ways you can help fight against the grain is that you give artists a chance to experiment. You give them a chance to grow old, to have scandals, to have mistakes. They are human beings as you are. They're just in the spotlight, and just be like, okay, this is where this artist's talent and work intersects with my own allowance, as well as obviously there are things that we can't control, like the year that is it, what's happening politically, the trends in social media, the trends in digital expansion, and things of that nature. All of those things matter in how we intersect with all of these factors. But when, as a person, when you boil it down to their agenda and their race, try and see what artists you can be supporting more, because that it really matters. Because if the industry doesn't respect race, doesn't respect gender, doesn't respect any of those things, it respects numbers, it respects profit margins, it respects where the dollar is going, right? And I remember in episode 3 when we talked about 2013 as a rupture, one of the things that we started to talk about there was social media and growing up in 4K, right? Growing up in an era where everything's being filmed and everything's being recorded. But what we didn't fully unpack is that social media, as we mentioned, there was the collapse of the traditional promotion of traditional promotion, and because of that, it also collapsed privacy, right? Because artists used to disappear between albums. When we were talking about the artists in the 80s, they could promote an album for 2 years, 3 years, and still go on tour, right? And after that happens, you only saw them when it was time for them to do their job, and not a day or after. But now, artists, they don't leave. We watch them date, we watch them break up, we watch them gain weight, we watch them lose weight, we watch them speak out, we watch them stay silent. Every move they make now is archived. And for artists that are younger, artists that grew up, start becoming known from when they are teenagers, like Miley, Selena, and Demi did, they are not allowed to grow up privately anymore. Growing up used to be private, but now it's performative. And permanence changes forgiveness, because we don't forget. So the mistakes they make when they were, we still talk about Miley's bangers era still tomorrow, right? Because we watch it happen in front of us. Even if she didn't put out an album, even before then, Miley was really a scapegoat. I really want to do a Hannah Montana episode. I really, really, really want to do one. I just don't know what I would like. I can't just sit here for an hour and be talking about. I mean, I could, but I'm just like, I do want to ground it in something, and I know that they're having the Hannah Montana anniversary thing this year, so maybe I'll do one that is adjacent to that. But like to to lose the plot a little bit today, like Hannah Montana, the concept of Hannah Montana is so. It's one of those things that I don't even call it silence, but it really rewired a lot of things in the industry. It really rewired what it meant to be an artist in so many ways. In so many ways, she's like the first AI artist, because she wasn't a real person. Like it's Hannah Montana is meta on so many levels, and the success of the show and of the music and of Miley after her is just indicative of so many things of the time. But yeah, anyways, back to Miley though. Miley is an example of Miley and her cohorts, an example of people that grew up in social media era that couldn't grow privately, and their scandals are referenced to tomorrow, sometimes to vilify them even, right? So everything that people do, and talking about forgiveness again, we have established that we are more lackadaisical, if that's the word, when it comes to forgiving men, and we're also interested when it comes to race as well. But this is another level of it, because we are continuing with all those things in social media era. Who you forgive, who the public consciousness forgives and decides to move on from, is also very different, right? It's also it's an interesting phenomenon to consider. There is a soft voice connection here that I think kind of meets everything where they're at. So the soft voice era, that we talked about briefly with Brandy and the girl, and Brandy's influence on music and how she puts as a technique being vulnerable and being specific as opposed to being loud and cinematic, is indicative of some of the things we're talking about, right? Because that soft voice era argued that intimacy replaced power. So, but intimacy requires vulnerability, and talked about how that can be a bit dicey. Because when men express sadness, for example, they are deep. But sometimes when women express sadness in music, it's labeled as unstable. When men express anger, it can be labeled as passionate, and when sometimes women express anger, they're labeled as difficult. So even that as a technique, the emotional evolution is policed differently, which means aging emotionally is also policed differently. And all this thing that we're saying about, that we're speaking hypothetically about, not even hypothetically, we're speaking very specifically about here. If we zoom out, we can say there's a human cost to all of these. These people that we're talking about, they are human beings. They are larger than life human beings. They've taught the world. They have crazy success. But we've spent 9 episodes analyzing the architecture of fame, and today we're acknowledging that people live inside that architecture. That pop star archetype demands relevance without aging, reinvention without instability, maturity without losing youth, authenticity without contradiction, and it's just impossible. And when artists inevitably fail at that impossible standard, we call it decline. But I want to offer to you today, so instead of seeing it as decline, maybe see it as growth. Think about your own personal life. And when someone's arguing about how somebody has fallen off because they don't have the same chart numbers and number one singles that they used to have before, offer to them that what the person is just growing in a different way, and that success has to evolve. And in the markets that they are in, they can't have that level of success forever because culture changes often. One of the things that I would really love is that this podcast helps people rethink how they engage with popular culture and celebrities and scandals and things of that nature by giving it context in the broader scheme of things, using history and things of the past to really understand how we get to this moment as a people, right? That would be a great joy of mine, that we are able to, like, when you are going back into the world because you listen to this podcast, you have a different perspective as to how things have become the way that they have become. I want to touch on a couple of people that we've talked about throughout these episodes that I think using their lives we can highlight the point. So, for example, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson is a very interesting one when it comes to aging as well, because Michael Jackson is a man, or was a man, but he, allegedly did some things to keep his voice the same way so that he wouldn't lose his audience. And even as he continued to age and get older, we still expected the same level of performance from him that we always did, even when we saw that he was sometimes struggling. Same thing can be said for Elvis, right? In the 1980s, Michael Jackson was untouchable. Just back to the numbers, Thriller sold over 70 million copies worldwide. He spent 37 weeks at number one. He introduced the moonwalk at Motown 25 in front of 47 million viewers. He was a spectacle perfected, is my point. But by the 1990s and the 2000s, that narrative started to shift, and the eccentricity that once felt magical about him became suspicious, right? His surgeries became headlines and the aging became discomfort. So the culture loved him as a prodigy, but when he started to age, we struggled to understand him more, and that obviously had an effect on his life. We've talked about Madonna a bit in today's episode, but even Madonna, she built the reinvention machine herself. From like a virgin to Vogue to Ray of Light, with all those records, she mastered narrative resets. But if we take a look back to like a year like 1992, when she had the sex book and the erotica era, this was consistent with who she had been, her branding all this time. The backlash was immediate and intense, right? And then fast forward to the 2010s again, when she's performing in her late 50s, people come clown on her and say that she's so desperate. Why won't she stop? And she's just doing what she's always done, is my point. The same reinvention that once made her a visionary became proof that she should step aside. So we celebrate our reinvention until we decide that, she's too old for us to accept this. So reinvention is celebrated until it challenges our comfort with women aging visibly. Right? One person that sits very interestingly in the intersection of everything I've talked about today is Janet Jackson, because Janet Jackson's career literally went off the rails because of one incident. And I think that Janet Jackson's career is an example of selective forgiveness, right? Because if you don't know this, I can do a brief history deep dive here. It's the year is 2004, and it's the Super Bowl halftime show. Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake are performing a song, there was a split second wardrobe malfunction with her outfit, and because of that, she was exposed indecently. Now, mind you, the person that technically caused this problem was Justin. He was the one that ripped up the thing, right? Not that he did it intentionally, but once this controversy went out, Justin recovered quickly from the controversy. Janet was immediately blacklisted. It was insane. Radio pulled her music, award shows distanced themselves from her, her corporate sponsors disappeared. One moment permanently altered her trajectory. And it wasn't just a scandal, it was selective forgiveness. And this was one of the examples that shows what I'm talking about in terms of gender, right? Selective forgiveness has a gender and race attached to it. And unfortunately for Janet Jackson, she was both a woman and she was black. She was a black woman. So she is a black woman. And she sat in the intersection of who we don't allow to age and who we selectively forgive. I thought about Whitney Houston for a while as well, where the persona of being perfect or being a perfect pop star became a burden for her, because whether we like it or not, we know that Whitney Houston set a standard. Again, just to go down her numbers, 7 consecutive number 1 singles. The Bodyguard soundtrack sold over 45 million copies. Her 1991 Super Bowl performance still charts decades later. But when her personal struggles became public and the crack of her being a perfect pop star started to wane, the culture that demanded perfection weaponized her humanity. And we turned her addiction into a spectacle. Her weight changes became commentary. Her vocal decline became mockery. So when perfection is your brand, growth becomes betrayal. Again, someone who sat at that intersection of being a black woman. Because who's to say that if she was a different race or a different gender, we would treat her as harshly as we did? Should I say we? Because I wasn't with y'all. Y'all did. In this house, Whitney Elizabeth Houston is still Miss Mamas. Okay? Always has, always will be. Honestly, so I'll let y'all have that one. Y'all can blame yourself for how y'all did Whitney. Y'all did my auntie dirty. Okay? And I think that again, there's so much that even in recent history, talking about artists like Lil Nas X and Doja Cat and other people like that there's a lesson to be learned from this, which is that as an artist, if you are building something, understand the blueprints, get ahead of these things coming your way. Understand that aging will be framed, understand that reinvention must be intentional, understand that narrative control is protection, because public perception is rarely neutral. It is shaped by structures older than you. And that's why I say also that for me, even in my own capacity as an upcoming artist, like I have an artifice. I have a version of me that is all caps, Adeolua, that is public facing, that is meticulously put together and is intentional about what I'm posting and who I am to the public. And I have my Isaac, I have my who I am to my friends, who I am to in my actual life. Because I think it's important. It's a way of protecting yourself from a very savage and ravenous industry. And this matters beyond music, right? What I love about popular culture, I keep saying this, is that we're able to talk about our own lives as human beings on a day-to-day, using these people as avatars, using their life and popular culture and their music and their art, and dissecting those things. By dissecting those things, we're dissecting ourselves and the lives that we live. Because this isn't just about music, it's not just about celebrities, it's about how we treat growth in real life. Why do we celebrate maturity in men but question it in women, even in our real lives, even as our day-to-day people? Why do we demand excellence from some and humanity from others? Why do we resent evolution when it disrupts our nostalgia? Right? Again, pop culture is just rehearsal for real culture. So when we talk about artists, the way we talk about artists always mirrors the way we talk about each other. So again, I'm throwing this back to you in your own daily conversations, in your own daily life. Think about who you're allowing to go up in the public and how you are shaping your reaction to what people are doing. Are you responding based on their gender, on their race, on their power, on their economic value, on their narrative control, their cultural comfort? Interrogate your own self. And it's okay for you to interrogate yourself and say that you're problematic as you're starting to do the work. And when you say you're problematic, then you can start doing the job and the work of adjusting that. But there is no adjusting without interrogation. The first step to know that to fixing a problem is admitting that you have a problem. So that's what I'm really offering us to do today, is that we should not mistake growth for decline. Right? This is 10 episodes in. I'm really glad that we've been able to map the machine so far. And today we're acknowledging the human beings inside of it. And sometimes we there are words, there are so many buzzwords that we just equal with each other. But what I'm arguing today is that growth is not failure. Aging is not betrayal. Reinvention is not desperation. Sometimes it's discipline, right? Sometimes we're doing all of these things, or the artists that we love are doing all of these things because they want to be better. They want to find a new path for themselves. They want to see what's not working or what is working for them and evaluate how they're going to engage with that. Okay? So today's episode is really for you guys, for us. Let me add myself back into it. It's for us, the audience at home, the people that are consuming the music. Which artists have you allowed to age gracefully? Which artists have you judged more harshly? Why? And what does that say about what we've been taught to expect? And how can you, knowing this, edit yourself and fix that? Okay? I think that's where I want to wrap things up for today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it. If it challenged you, sit with it, but still share it. And if listening to the pod has grown with you over these 10 episodes, thank you so much. I really do appreciate everyone that has listened. This means so much to me. I've wanted to do this for such a long time. So be able to actually live out my dream this way is actually such a blessing. And I'm really grateful to all of you. This episode has never been just about music for me. It's always been about understanding the systems we participate in and choosing to see them clearly. So again, I want you to, wherever you are listening, to always understand that we're always trying to hit at something deeper by discussing these people and understand ourselves better by using them as a spectacle. Before I leave you today, there's a new thing I want to start saying. Hopefully I'm not sure I'll make it a thing yet, but it's something that really for me increasingly is how I guess live my life, and I want to share with you. Greatness isn't a moment. Let me start again. Greatness isn't a moment. It's maintenance. As long as you are still refining, you are still progressing, and progress never loses. Till next time, you guys, stay crowned.